from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
One of the major issues in the business world and in the field of the economy over the last few years has to do with a reorganization of institutions, mergers and downsizing of corporations. And as many of you know, a number of employees have been reassigned or go through retraining. As that all happens, it really creates for the worker oftentimes crisis. And even for those who don't experience this, there is also sometimes at the workplace a real definite question about how we go about working with our fellow employees. There's an issue called the human spirit and how we incorporate that into all of this change and development within our economy. We had a guest on this program about 2 years ago that certainly is an expert on this subject, and he now is talking about something called changing the chart, changing the heart. We were thrilled to have him before, and we've invited him back, and it's my pleasure now on behalf of the panel to welcome to the program John Scheer, who is the president of John Scheer & Associates. It's an organization located in Spokane, Washington, and many people, consultants and corporation executives, come to his organization for help both in Spokane, and he travels to their locations. John, we had a great time with you about 2 years ago, and thank you for coming back, and we're excited about your most recent endeavors and the work you've been doing. Welcome to our program.
Glad to be back.
And as always, I'm pleased to have our two regular panelists. First of all is Janelle Burke, an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And today's question will commence with Janelle Burke.
John, welcome back to the program. It's going to be great to talk to you today about human spirit in the workplace. What exactly are we talking about when we're talking about the spirit in the workplace?
You know, Janelle, there are lots of ways to answer that. At the individual or personal level, as you know from being in workplaces yourself, when you get up in the morning to go to work, there's a certain feeling that you begin to have as you get in the car or begin your commute or whatever it is you're heading toward the workplace. And that sense that goes on inside of you could be called the spirit that you bring to your work. It's affected by what happens at work, and your spirit affects what happens. It's a kind of a synergy there. And what we found is that there's so many things that occur in the little moments at work. You do a great piece of work and nobody acknowledges you for it, or you have a problem and you go to your supervisor and nobody seems interested to hear you, or you're working hard but you have no idea how what you do fits into the big picture. Over time, or you have an unresolved conflict with somebody at work and you can't seem to get anywhere. Over time, these things begin to wear away the spirit of the individual to the point where they can sometimes shut down. And basically, what you're getting when you hire somebody is you're just getting a pair of hands and about a half a brain. And we think that's a waste, a tremendous waste. You know, you could say that the human spirit is a terrible thing to waste because it's what moves, it's what motivates people.
Are you talking about self-confidence in the job?
Quite often, self-confidence goes along with it. The people who seem to be, here's the question. While I'm at work, let's say, we're talking about work in the human spirit. While I'm at work, what am I going to navigate off of? What am I going to use as the places on which to base my decisions? If my sense of security is dependent on, like, what my boss thinks of me or this particular job, then my self-confidence is going to be at risk every time I'm called on to say or do something that may be right for the situation or right for the organization, but might be risky for me. So it's a kind of a concomitance that only those people who have courage seem to be able to navigate off of their something deeper, the human spirit. And I think vice versa. It's only those people who have tapped into who they are at a deeper level that can find the source for having the courage to say the tough things at work.
Are we talking about job satisfaction?
I believe that the only kind of satisfaction that lasts with people is a satisfaction that we bring to the work. I think many people come to work and then, just like in a relationship, they expect the other person to provide the joy, or that somehow they look outside of themselves. And I think we need to bring a sense of worth and a sense of contribution and a sense of joy in the actual doing of the work. And for some people, that's a real hard thing. But I remember watching people on an assembly line one time, and this one woman was doing this work over and over and over again. I went up to her and I said, "How in the world can you do this every day, like this, hour after hour after hour?" And she looked at me and she said, she smiled and she said, "Honey," she said, "think of this. I get to sit here all day long and think about whatever I want to think about and talk with my friends here about whatever I want to talk about." Now, she had found a way to bring her own joy, her own satisfaction, in a sense, to a very menial job, which could probably not have given anybody any kind of satisfaction. So I think we need to bring our satisfaction to the work and not look for it to come from the work.
John, I'm going to back away a little bit from sort of that micro view of spirit in the workplace and take a broader view for a second. As a consultant, I expect that you work with the extremes, companies that are either in a lot of trouble and say, "Gee, we need John Shearer to come in here and help us," or companies that are forward-thinking enough to do some planning for improvement. Could you give us sort of an assessment, a health check of there have been some major changes in the American workplace in the last few years. How's that affected spirit on the macro level?
That's a great question. Companies that are running scared tend to be the ones that, in a sense, that not only does the individual have a spirit, but the whole organization has a spirit. And for a corporation whose spirit is afraid, if they're running scared, what tends to happen is their sense of time scale gets reduced to, well, what have you done for us this quarter? And then what have you done for us this month? And when that happens, people get very cost conscious. And there are two ways to improve the economic well-being of an organization. One is to cut costs, and the other is to increase revenue and keep your margins where they are. And the simplest and the quickest way is to cut costs. And so when you look at most organizations, where most of the costs are located are in the people. Ergo, it's sort of one's like a logic chain, therefore we have to let some of our people go. And even in companies that are moving rapidly and are growing, expanding, hiring people, there is this sense of unease in the American workforce about when could this happen to us? Okay, it's great now, but what would happen next week? What would happen next quarter? So I sense a real sense of dis-ease and unease and anxiety in the American workforce at all levels. There's no place safe anymore.
Well, that brings me back again a little bit to that micro level we talked about before. And you said that people who have real joy bring their own joy to the workplace, or people with the courage and the self-confidence to make tough decisions or recommendations, even if it puts them personally at risk. Sometimes that risk sends you looking for another job, and I think there is that sense in many American workers today that there's no certainty, no assurance that their job's going to be there tomorrow. What's your advice to those people? How do they maintain that sense of joy and stay valuable to the organization they work for?
Great. Another good question. You all have great questions. I think what every worker needs to know now is that the old psychological contract is null and void. The old covenant, really. There used to be a covenant between the worker and the organization. If I go to work and I work hard and I keep my nose clean and I do good things, I'm going to be taken care of for the rest of my life. I want to hereby declare on behalf of all the people in the world who haven't got the courage to say it to their people, that covenant is unfortunately null and void. That the truth is, we will keep you here as long as we can, as long as we think it makes economic sense, and as long as we think that you have something to contribute to us. Now here's the key. If I'm a worker, how do I enhance my attractiveness or up the odds that I will survive these things? There are a couple of things you might want to consider doing. One is realize that in the past your value to the company was based on your track record. That is, if you did good things in the past, you could pretty much be expected that they would keep you around. And now it's not what did you do for us in the past, but what can you do for us in the immediate future? So I would say keep your skills as sharp and as current and as future-oriented as possible. Another suggestion is to be flexible. Learn to do more than just one thing. Somebody who's just a one-trick pony is just not going to make it much anymore. And the other thing is to take responsibility for your own career, your own morale, because the company cannot do that for you anymore. My older son is a rock musician, and he has a saying that he was talking to me about this one day. He said, "It seems to me, Dad, that people don't have jobs anymore, they have gigs. That this is this is the current gig that you have. And what you really do is you don't have a job that has security. You have skills. You have something you bring, and that's where your security is. So I think this puts a tremendous, and for me, exciting burden and responsibility on every worker in America to become as highly skilled and as multifaceted as they can possibly be. And then expect a lot of change. Expect to have several gigs over your life. The average person, according to the most recent numbers I saw, the average person will actually change careers 5 times. And that's extraordinary. So people need to just actually expect that rather than be upset when it happens.
John, I have a very complicated question, and you're so much fun to do and on the program, and so I don't know where I'm going for sure.
Well, let's just start and see where we end up.
We'll start and see where we end up. I'm going to shift gears to some extent. In all your work that you've done, you spend so much time talking about the human spirit, and I look at that as the essence of who you are internally as a person. And I want to, in my complicated question, have you to compare personal relationships, like with a spouse, with family, and then also at the workplace. And my question suggests this, that even though some individuals have a great appreciation and they're in connecting with their spirit and they're positive, that things happen in their personal relationships or in the workplace that makes it very, very detrimental to that human spirit. I talk of it sometimes as a flame. The human spirit is a flame. And if cold air is blown on that flame, it's very dangerous.
Low too.
So how do you help people in the workplace or in a relationship? I guess what I'm saying is, can that endanger them, or can they sometimes have to remove themselves from that situation, even though they may have job security?
And I heard another question implied in there, which is, and how to stoke the fire, how to keep the fire going. So 2 things. Very definitely when, and we get phone calls and letters from people sometimes asking for advice about this, and it's a hard thing to give somebody advice just without knowing who they are. But just like in marriages, sometimes you're in a situation where you or other people are being absolutely destroyed by the relationship, and you make all the effort you can to change and do something for yourself or the other people. And if it isn't working, then by all means you need to move to something else. I was just on the phone just before I came in to do this shoot with a man who's in that situation, and he's the vice president, and the president of the company doesn't respect him, and he's been trying hard for 2 years to do something, and he finally put his resume out. And I was encouraging him to say, that's great. We need to have options. We need to know that we have choice in our lives. And when the flame goes down, it's when we feel like we're being squeezed and being trapped. Things that can be done to keep the flame going. They sound really simple and maybe dumb, but they're absolutely essential. In our intensives, we get people who tell us that these have been some of the most important things that they took home with them from the workshop. One is that breathing is very important. It's extraordinary how when we get tense and stressed, our breathing gets shallower and shallower, which means that we're not getting as much oxygen exchange, which means it literally affects the way we think and the way we feel. Keeping yourself as physically flexible and mobile as you possibly can. Fear affects us in the chest area and in the shoulders and the back. We tend to round off. So if there's anything you can do to literally just open yourself up physically, that can do it. The other thing is to have people that you can talk to about this. People that you can, who won't agree with you, who won't just sort of say, oh yeah, what a terrible situation, but people who will listen to you and help you think it through at a little bit of a deeper level. Those things are little things that you can do all the time that can help keep the fire stoked.
The day we're taping this program is November the 11th. It'll air later, but I heard a report yesterday on television where a study that's just been finished that particularly middle-aged men who become angry a lot and express that anger have, I believe it's 2 or 3 times greater chance of stroke. So you're saying there's a real physical aspect to this.
More cardiac events occur between the 8 o'clock and 8 o'clock and noon on Monday morning than any other time of the week.
So that is
now,
a
what does
warning
that tell you? People are getting up and they're going to work Monday morning, 8 o'clock, and that's when most of the of the cardiac events occur. Isn't that fascinating?
Janelle Burke.
I have a series of questions regarding words that we're familiar with now and that mean something in our contemporary workplaces. And I wondered if you would just give us your reaction to these words. Mergers. What's going on?
Oh.
What happens in the workplace when a merger occurs?
Mergers are absolutely essential. When organizations get to a certain size, they have to grow or else they're going to die. And sometimes the best way strategically for them to grow and to survive is to merge with another organization. The dilemma is that I have never really seen a merger until very recently. I've never ever seen a merger. I've only seen acquisitions. A big fish eats a little fish. And what happens is the winning, it's sort of like a war begins between two cultures. And I was involved in one merger process a few years ago where the larger company merged with the smaller company in order to get their culture, they liked the small culture, the family feel, and they just sucked them up and they disappeared, dropped like a marble in a bowl of oatmeal. So the problem with mergers is that unless you attend to the human factor very, very conscientiously, all that happens is the bigger one eats a little one and everybody goes home.
What about downsizing? That's another one of the things that's happening.
Yes, and there are other euphemisms for that now, Janelle, like right-sizing is another euphemism which is saying that many times organizations get top-heavy or heavy in the middle. Usually they're heavier in the middle, and downsizing becomes the only way to do it. Downsizing, though, is a scourge, I believe, that is cutting like a scythe through American organizations in a way that doesn't allow the survivors to really pull together. And we were doing a workshop recently. How many words do you have? I don't want to take too much time on this.
Just 3.
Okay, good. One more. We were doing a workshop, and we had people, like about 80 people from around the country in a seminar. And after a few hours, they've been working at round tables. We went around and we said, okay, now you're fired. You get up and go out in the hall. You've been transferred to this group over here. We're not sure about you. You may have a job, you may not have a job, and you 3 can stay. And then we met with each of these groups. I was out in the hall. Well, after we'd gone about 3 or 4 tables, one whole table stood up and said, "We quit. We're out of here. We're not going to wait for you to fire us." And they went out in the hall. So I was the outplacement person that's standing out in the hall. So then we asked each of these groups the same 2 questions. How do you feel right now? And what are you learning from this? The group that quit was happy. They were thrilled. I've been waiting to do this for years. Finally got a chance to quit and go do something for myself. The group that got fired was a little bit quiet. They went around, talked about how they feel like I've been kicked in the stomach and so forth. And then once somebody said, I think this could be a good thing for me. And immediately the conversation turned positive. The only group that had only negative things to say was the group that had stayed, that did not get fired or transferred, or where there was a question. They were thinking, when's the sword going to fall on me? So downsizing has left an indelible imprint in the heart and soul of every person in the American workforce. What's your third word?
Outsourcing.
Outsourcing. This is another. These are all very necessary and very positive things, and absolutely essential in many situations to have an organization survive. These are survival instincts on the part of an organization. Outsourcing is where people find out that they can actually get the work done cheaper, better, faster outside the organization. I don't know how to speak about it in the abstract except to say that if it makes good business sense to outsource, if it makes good sense to downsize, if it makes good sense to merge, do it in a way that respects the people that are involved. Imagine that it's simple. Imagine that you're in that group and how would you want to be treated? And then treat people that way.
Steve Sheen.
My next question, John, kind of follows up on Janelle's last one and my previous round of questions where we talked about your advice to employers, the dissolution of the old covenant between employee and worker, keeping skills sharp, and that kind of thing. Let's turn to the employer for a minute. Mm-hmm. I think employers are asking more of workers today. It is a competitive environment out there. What should they give back to the employee in return to keep them as happy and productive as possible while they're with them?
That's great, because the leaders still want loyalty, even though they don't have any currency. the traditional currency of job security just isn't there anymore. But what leaders have to offer and what senior managers have to offer, they have a lot to offer. They can promise you will be the best trained, the best led, the best motivated, the best prepared workforce that we know how to have happen here. And if it should come to pass that you need to find work somewhere else, we will make sure that you get every possible assistance in finding a place of equal or greater value for yourself wherever you go next. If employers would say that, now that's a covenant that people could really get excited about, I think.
We've kind of looked at the landscape of today's workplace, and I hope this isn't an unfair question, but I'm going to ask you to look ahead a bit and tell us if you see some things that you would say are significant changes.
I think the speed of change is turning out to be a mixed blessing, but on the whole, it's going to be a plus, because it means that organizations that can't adapt quickly, and that means leadership primarily. I find workforces at the bottom are ready to go. They just, put us in, coach. Just tell us what you want us to do, and we'll do it. The conflicts come in the middle, where people are saying, well, what's my, that's where the real fear is. And at people at the top who may be afraid to move. I think the pressures of the globalization, all the things that are happening. I mean, if you aren't with it, you're either going to change or you're going to die. Are ultimately in the next, I would say, by the time we get to the year 2000, there will be very few organizations left that are of the old green eye shade bureaucratic mindset. They will be weeded out. They will be weeded out for sure. So to me, the plus is in the future. I think we're going to see organizations that are faster. I was in France a year ago at a conference, sitting next to the marketing director for BMW. I guess I can say that. And we were talking, and he said, John, it used to be that the victory went to the biggest, and now he said the victory goes to the quickest. So to me, the organizations, and I see more and more organizations are splitting. They're getting smaller instead of bigger. Even the big organizations are creating business units that are smaller and able to move quicker. I think we're going to get a faster, more flexible American work scene here in the very short future. Thank you.
There are a number of statistics out that I believe it's by the year 2010, which is not very far off, that 25%, I believe I'm correct in what I heard on statistics, 25% of the people will be in jobs that do not exist today. And so that does talk to your question and answer. In the little time that we have left, we have about 6 or 7 minutes, I would like for you to address something that you've been addressing. You've worked with over 2,000 employees recently, I believe, on the West Coast, and dealing with, again, merger and what's happening. And you're using a term called changing the chart, changing the heart. Would you explain what you mean by that concept?
You bet. And usually in mergers or acquisitions or downsizing, there's a what's called the as-is state of the organization, and a group of people go off and they design the future or the to-be state of the organization, and then they do some kind of backward planning and say, well, how do we get from here to there? We need to reduce the size of this and change and so forth. That's above the waterline, we call it. It's operational, it's tangible, it's measurable. You can go in and take a big whiteboard and redraw the organization, and you're done. And then you just put it out in a memo and say, like, next Wednesday, here we go. We say, not exactly. That there is below the waterline a whole world, which is the emotional, personal, unseen, invisible world, which really determines whether the change that you're doing on top of the waterline actually takes or not. There are companies that have merged 5 years ago that have never really merged. There are companies that downsized 5 years ago that have never, ever healed. Why? Because whoever was leading the process didn't acknowledge or attend to what we call the below the waterline stuff, or the heart space. So we say that changing the chart does not change the heart, and that if you want to accelerate or facilitate the actual change of the chart, then you need to, it's almost like a paradox. The more attention you pay to changing the heart or addressing the heart and accepting the heart of what's happening, the faster you'll be able to change the chart. And we've been working on some methodologies to do that, and we just had an experience with 2 insurance companies, one about 2,000, one about 500-600, that merged where that was our assignment. The CEO said, John, your job, your people, is to safeguard the human spirit during this merger process. What a thrilling, thrilling consultation it was.
I'll play the devil's advocate, and I'll be the head of a corporation, and I say to you, what you're suggesting is that we have to bring in two consulting firms, one that's an expert on the chart and one's an expert on the heart. And what we're trying to do is save some money, and we're talking about short range versus long range.
Great question.
Try to justify to me as president of the corporation why we can do that and still meet the goals that we're after.
Because the other consulting firm that was brought in told the client, look, it's going to take you 3 years to heal from this. It usually takes clients about 3 years to heal from this kind of process. Our client said, well, no, that's why we have John Scher and his people in here. So what we did is we were plotting how long it took for the organization to return to profitability. It's a number thing. Instead of taking 3 years, 4 to 5 months later, they were already on the upswing and were equal to, in some departments, were past where they were before the merger occurred. So I think it's possible. So you want to know about saving money. You want to spend 3 years down here, mucking around in the swamp trying to get people to get back to their motivated place, or do you want to have them up and running and feeling good about where they are? That band of money there more than covers the extra consulting fee, is what I would say.
The official from BMW, was that not what he was saying to you, is that even if I use the old school, I may be bigger, but I may not survive because I'm not changing fast
Can't
enough.
rely on bigness anymore. It's going to be speed.
Janelle, we have less than 2 minutes.
My question then to you is sort of similar to Tony's, except from the employee's standpoint. What do you think, as an employee going into a merger situation or a downsizing situation, how can I look at it? You talked about that a little bit earlier when you talked about the various groups of people, but what are the most positive things I can do for my mental health if I'm in a situation where there's going to be a merger or downsizing?
Great question. I would talk to my supervisor. I would say, what are my, how do you, let's go have a cup of coffee. This is off the books. How am I doing? Give me some advice based on, this is off the record. What are my chances here? If it looks like my job is going to be in jeopardy, I would say, okay, can you help me? Would you support me in getting my resume together and so forth? Keep choices in your life. You've got to have options for yourself. Where you get in trouble is when the things shrink down and you don't have it.
We're out of time.
Oh, no.
But John,
okay.
we'd like to bring you back again. You're always so fun to interview. On behalf of the panel and the staff, we thank John Scher, the President John Scher and Associates. You're just always so exciting to interview, and we will have you back at some future time.
Anytime.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll join us again next week at the same time, and we will discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.